In this day and age especially, it cannot hurt to keep your options open, and having multiple citizenships is one way of doing that. And that is what we're going to be talking about this week on this episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. Roll that intro. Hello there, I'm Rafael Di Furia. Welcome back to another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. This week we are going to be diving into dual citizenship. Also, as a caveat to this episode is not here to give you the information how to get the citizenship, a second citizenship, but it's giving you the overview information of what you need to look for to be able to start getting the ball rolling, because I know there are plenty of people out there who don't even know where to get started. Many of you I know subscribed for information about Italian citizenship. This episode is not going to focus specifically on Italian citizenship. We're probably barely even going to touch on that topic, but talking generally about dual citizenship, because dual citizenship is not just something that people can get through their ancestry, like for people of Italian descent, Polish, Irish, whatever it may be. But for individuals who are looking for options in this world, to have options for education, for work, or even for political reasons, if they decide that they would like to leave the country that they currently reside in, a secondary passport or tertiary or beyond that can open up these abilities for you to have access to certain parts of the world. Because of course, getting citizenship through descent is not the only way to become a dual citizen. I can't tell you how many people I've spoken to over the years who said, oh yeah, my ancestors come from X, Y, or Z country, but I don't know what documents to get. I don't know how to get the documents. Nobody in my family kept documents. Nobody this, nobody that, nobody the other. And at the end of the day, that doesn't really matter all that much. Of course, it helps if you have basic information, because that's where you can get started. Like for example, recently there have actually been a few people that have just all of a sudden come out of nowhere that I've been in contact with in different parts of my life. And they all kind of have the same story, that their family came from Poland, but nobody has the documents, nobody nothing. And of course, they don't speak Polish themselves, but Poland is one of those countries that does have a very open citizenship by descent scheme in place. Poland happens to be a country somewhat similar to Italy, that there's a very open system in place. Not necessarily that it's going to be super easy to run through, but when you finally start to get an understanding of how one citizenship works, at least in Europe and some other parts of the world as well, but especially in Europe, then it kind of opens up the kind of floodgates, and then you can start understanding how other citizenship systems work, whether it's by citizenship by residency or citizenship by descent. A lot of people have a grandparent, a great-grandparent, whatever it may be. It's worth looking at that, especially for people from the US. A lot of people have a random grandparent, great-grandparent, or whatever who came from some other country. And it is worthwhile to take a look to see if that country offers citizenship by descent. And if so, is there a generational limit for countries like Poland, if I'm not mistaken, and then Italy, definitely, there's no generational limit, at least at this point in time. And gathering the documents may be impossible for you, but there are going to be genealogists or lawyers or people who work in this space who regularly deal with these topics, who are going to be able to help you through this. So because you might not necessarily know how to get through it, doesn't mean that there's not somebody out there who's not going to be able to help you narrow down your search and do it all for you, or just to get the documents from your ancestral homeland and to be able to send those to you so that you can make the application, or that they can do the application on your behalf in some countries. So that's the first thing that I would say is, if you are seriously thinking about moving abroad and you want to live that expat life, look at your ancestry first. Look at where they came from and look at what options could be available to you based on that alone. Of course, not every country is going to have citizenship by descent. So that leads me to another common way that people get citizenship, and that's citizenship by residence. And when you're talking about citizenship by residence, you have to consider and start planning for where is it that you want to live, where is it that you want to move to, and what is the process and what is the route that you want to take there. I think there's some planning that is definitely worth taking into consideration, because if, for example, let's talk about Europe. Europe is one area that I definitely have a lot more of knowledge base around. Not all citizenship application processes are going to be the same. For example, if you look at Portugal, their linguistic requirement is at A2, whereas in in Italy, it's at B1. And for these certification levels, if you don't know about that, I would recommend taking a quick look for, say, Portuguese A2, A1, B1, B2, C1, and to understand what the levels are, or even Italian. It's part of the European framework for languages. A2 is technically, I guess, upper beginner, but whatever. There's a big difference between, in my opinion at least, between A1 and B2, but not getting too much deeper into that topic. Then you also have to take a look at what are some of the other factors that go into being able to get citizenship through residency. And the biggest one, of course, being the amount of time that you have to actually reside in the country. If you're talking about a country like, say, Belgium or Portugal, your time for residence there may actually only be 5 years, whereas, again, using Italy as an example, citizenship by residency after 10 years, at least if you're not doing it through marriage, because citizenship through marriage, that's a different situation with different rules around it, but it's also a form of naturalization. Sometimes when you're getting citizenship through your ancestry, there could be instances where you are automatically a citizen that's recognized at birth, and you have a retroactive late birth registration as an adult, or maybe before you turn 18, if you're lucky enough and your parents do it for you or help you with it. But then there are other systems where you might be able to get citizenship through an ancestral tie, through naturalization. I can say that I've looked into my family background and I've been able to look and see, oh, it's not just one citizenship that I would be eligible for. And I mean, just based on birth, I'm theoretically eligible for 3 passports. But based on ancestral ties to different countries, I at least have 1, if not 2 or 3 more passports that I theoretically could pursue if I wanted. But this gets back into the planning part, like I was talking about before. Where is it that you want to live, and what passport is going to help you get there? So for example, if I were somebody who's like, I am an Italian citizen who got their Italian citizenship through ancestry, and basically the same way recognized as anybody who would be born in Italy as an Italian citizen would be recognized. So same status level, there's no difference there. As many of you know, I lived in Italy, resided there, but then due to family circumstances, I relocated to Portugal. And because of my Italian citizenship, that allowed me to come here because of the European Union. So if I were somebody who had maybe thought about wanting to go to Germany, and a lot of people do this, a lot of people want to go to Germany or the Netherlands or Sweden, they get like an Italian citizenship or Polish citizenship, or maybe their family came from Germany and their family was expelled from the nation, without getting too much into details, of course, because the limitation on certain terminology that you can use on YouTube, there were people who had to flee from that part of the world as well as Poland. I'm sure you might be able to guess why based on historical context. If you look around, say, the time around the 40s or so, even maybe before, but that's a different topic. But having that ability to get one of those passports then potentially could allow you to get to the nation that you're maybe more interested in. And I know there are people, for example, who get their Italian citizenship and have the intention of moving to Germany because of the options that they have available to them for work there, because maybe they're in the tech sector, or they just like Germany and they want to be there. In the past, I know a lot of people wanted to go to the UK, especially people of Italian descent from the US. A lot of them were aiming for the UK before Brexit came along. But I do know as well many non-native speakers that did choose to go to the UK as well before Brexit. And so that's the thing, is there's a bit of planning that you can do, that if you're aiming for one country, that maybe the system in place there, at least when we're talking about specifically the European Union, planning it through another country, whether you're getting it through descent or through naturalization, then could help you to get there. And sometimes, like in the case of, say, if you're somebody who has an interest in Hungary and being able to reside there, the Hungarian nationality is not necessarily one of the easiest ones to get to. The visa, that's a different situation. Visas, of course, are much easier to get than citizenships. But if you have a citizenship as a European citizen first before going to a country, that can definitely help you. So looking at a country that might be like, for example, a Portugal or another similar country with similar options available, or if you're buying a citizenship, buying in air quotes, like a golden visa of sorts, then having that available to you can then allow you to move in that direction and then have an easier time to just arrive in that country. You will have the process beforehand that you have to go through. But if you're the type of person that's looking to travel the world and spend time abroad and have adventures, then having that as part of your plan might not be the worst thing. I know there are people who are just at that point in their life, especially like in their 20s or maybe even starting to get into their 30s, that they're just wanting to explore the world. And having to spend time in a place so that you are able to get the passport is not necessarily the worst thing ever. But of course, when we're talking about even the requirement for, like, say, 5 years of residency, that doesn't mean that you are going to have the citizenship at 5 years. It could be another year or two on top of that. So even for the Italian 10 years, you could theoretically have it, up to 12 years. I forget the rules. I know they changed them in the past couple of years. For the response time. But when you are actually pursuing citizenship like that, then this is something that you can take into account. Or if you are somebody, again, I'm focusing a lot on Europe here because there are a lot of ways that you can make your way to the continent. And so for another example, if you are married to someone who is a European citizen, so for example, if you have one spouse, that I know plenty of people that have one spouse is Irish and they've decided to move to even like here in Portugal, the Irish spouse can register as a European national living here, whereas their spouse, the non-European national, would be able to get some type of family reunification visa or to have a visa as the spouse of a European citizen. That's a big one right there. And that starts giving that other person the ability, in some cases, if not all, to be able to work and support their family. Of course, maybe there's going to be situations where those people could be retired and working is not even a consideration necessary to think about. But these are the things that you have to think about. If you're single, look at your family's history. Dive into every nook and cranny and think about, well, maybe I had this great grandfather. I never knew him. He came from this one place and blah, 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 and this and that and the other. And then maybe that will allow you to pursue something in a country you'd never really even given much time to. I mean, maybe even for some people, I think Romania might have something. I don't know if Romania does or not. It doesn't matter. But again, looking at certain parts of the world and figuring out, does your ancestry give you at least a way to open the door? If not, then the next thing you do, like I said, look at residency. And if you happen to be married to somebody, don't try to marry somebody to get a citizenship or a nationality, to get any kind of visas. That's like such a bad idea. If you are wanting to call another part of the world home, what are the options that you have available to you? So even another way to be able to first get into a country is looking at the visas to get there. And sometimes your way of actually entering the country for residency could be through a work visa. Maybe you might have to teach English abroad for X amount of years. Or maybe in some countries, you can sponsor your own visa for teaching English. There might be others where you actually have to find a school that's willing to say, hey, they'll give you a contract and then actually bring you there or help you get there somehow. I mean, even countries like Japan, at least in the past, I would assume maybe they still have something now, have had programs where they actually bring people over and give them visas and so on to be able to teach English. I don't know if Korea had that. China, I believe, has had something, and maybe still, at least to an extent, has something for native English speakers where they were giving visas to people. But then you also have to consider about the country that you're going to. Will you be able to get citizenship there one day? And will you want the citizenship from there one day? There will be some countries that you might be looking at. And if you're going to invest your time and life into a place and want the option to get citizenship to be able to open up the world to you, then you have to consider the power of that passport and planning around that. So there will be some countries that may actually require you to give up your nationality. And if I'm not mistaken, even China would be one of those countries where if you're a Chinese citizen, theoretically, you would only be allowed to be a Chinese citizen. And even the amount of people that get naturalized as a Chinese citizen are very few. And I'm not even talking about desirability, but I'm talking about the amount of people who actually do get it is not necessarily one of the highest numbers in the world. And then also getting that citizenship may also be tied to not only a linguistic requirement, but a cultural requirement, and not only a cultural requirement, but also that you've been able to financially support yourself during that time. Because of course, many countries aren't looking for people that they have to support on their social systems, because a lot of social systems around the world, just to begin with, are completely bogged down. And to open it up even more adds an extra strain onto the country. So that's another thing to take into consideration. So what passport do you have, and what access does it give you to certain parts of the world? Because there will be also certain passports that it helps you get to X, Y, or Z place, and maybe you have easier access to one part of the world than maybe somebody from another part would, and maybe vice versa, that the other person would have better access to another part. So pursuing dual citizenship does unlock the door, but first you have to unlock the door to dual citizenship. And that requires a lot of time and research. But once you understand, again, how to unlock the door for one place, that can start helping you to unlock the door for others, because a lot of systems, like I said earlier, are very similar to one another, where in almost every case, you're going to need a copy of your birth certificate from your home country. But then on top, how do you certify that document? So let's just give an example here. In many cases, if you are from a country that is part of the Hague Convention on apostilles and certification of documents, then things could be a little bit easier for you in some cases. And not all countries are signatories to this convention, to this international treaty. You can look up online if your country and the country that you're interested in going to are signatories to this. And then what you would need, at least the very basic thing, would be your own birth certificate, a certified copy of your birth certificate, and then send that off to probably the state capital of where you're from to get an apostille. Basically, at the end of the day, you have your certified birth certificate, but only the local government is able to say, hey, this document is all good. This is us. We did that. But to build it out and to say on an international level that document is actually certified, that the certification on there is proper, that's going to take an extra step. And that's the apostille that you have to get. The apostille is basically, at the end of the day, the certification of the certification that says that your document is what it's supposed to be from the authority that it's supposed to be from. And this international usable seal is going to help you to be able to use it in another country. If you're getting it from the US, though, it's all probably only going to be in English. So depending on what country you would need to use it for, you might have to get it translated. But of course, not all countries are a signatory to the Apostille Convention. So that could be a whole different thing. And you might have to get a different type of certification from another US governmental body of some sort. And that's going to, again, depend on the country that you're in. But presenting that document itself to the nation where you're going to be, more than likely, it's not going to be an English-speaking country. I mean, okay, if you're going to New Zealand or England, Australia, maybe a couple other countries out there that might accept documents in English, but many countries will not accept it. Italy, for example, that's one for people who are pursuing Italian citizenship by descent or even through naturalization, have to get their documents translated and somehow officially certified. If you're doing it through a consulate in the US, then that's something that the consulate theoretically can do. But if you're doing it in Italy, then it's a whole different process and that we're not even going to get into in this episode. There will be countries that will accept documents in their original language. So for example, even recently, just because I'm also the type of person that believes whatever documents that you have available to you, even if you have to order them, even if it's not available at your fingertips, you should always have at least a couple of copies that are safely kept, because you never know when you might need them. So I've been going through the process recently to get a copy of my Italian birth certificate because, hey, I'm an Italian citizen. I may as well have a copy of it. And not only that, I've wanted to have an apostille copy. So the good thing, at least from the area where my birth certificate is coming from in Italy, is that it is in both Italian and English. So that's actually really, really useful to have for, say, if there's a country that I wanted to use it in some type of situation where I would need to submit that document in a country that would be able to at least recognize the document in English, or maybe at a consulate that would accept a document in English, because maybe they're not going to accept a document in Italian, but in English, that could be more likely just because it's more of an international language. But then also many citizenships will require you to have a criminal record report from your country and to be able to submit that again with an apostille if available and if necessary, or with some other type of international certification of some sort. And then also your passport. So again, these are it's all about having all of the documents relevant to you and who you are, and to be able to prove all of that. So if you've got a driver's license, keep your driver's license, but that's not necessarily going to be something that you might be able to use for applying for a citizenship or for even for a visa. But having your passport and keeping a current passport, even if you're never going to use it, it is, in my personal opinion, worthwhile keeping a current passport. Because you only have to renew it depending on the country every 10 years or so. But if you have multiple passports, then you have to start thinking about, okay, which one has more value to you, or can you just keep them all valid? You can do that. It's not a problem at all. It gets expensive, but once you divide it over the spread of a decade or so, then it's fine enough. But this is the thing, having this understanding of what options you have available to you and what options you can make available to you really is the key to being able to live an expat life. Having the research done, and even if you don't have to do all of it yourself, having somebody there with you, in my personal opinion, can be very, very worthwhile. Depending on the nationality, yes, there are some that you can do for yourself, but I would say that in many cases, it's really worthwhile to have someone there with you who knows how to legally navigate the system and is familiar with it, being able to make the type of request that you're making, because they'll be able to know which office, theoretically, which person to talk to, and may already at least have some inkling as to whether your documents are good enough or there's going to be a problem. They can let you know about that ahead of time and what you'll have to do for your process. So when you're looking at getting the ball rolling, start doing Google searches. That is the first thing that you do. Again, I can't even tell you how many people I've spoken to that say, I don't know where to get started. I don't know how to get this document. I don't know where to do this. I don't know how to do that. But of course, the first thing that really needs to be done is a Google search, because almost all of the information you could ever need is available for free online. I mean, that's part of why Not Your Average Globetrotter exists, is to give a free resource for some information that could be relevant to people out there looking for it. But episodes like this are also for the individuals who are just looking for that starting point that they don't know where to even jump off from, that this is kind of like the pre-step one, things to think about before you even get started. And with that said, I think this is going to be a great place to round out this episode. So thank you all so much for joining in for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. Even a bigger thank you to those of you who help to make these episodes possible on a monthly basis through Patreon, rafaeldifuria.com/Patreon or patreon.com/rafaeldifuria, as well as the thanks button and one-time donations. Really, those all help this project to be able to keep going. And as well as thank you to those of you who take part in the conversations down in the comment section below here on YouTube. It's always great to hear what you guys have to say and what you think and whether you agree or disagree. Of course, a huge thank you to those of you who are subscribed and hit the like button and have the notification bell turned on and share these episodes with your friends. It is all greatly appreciated and really does help out the project. Of course, I'm also Rafael Di Furia. Stay safe and healthy out there, and I will see you all next time for the next episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. Later.